Some stories scream from the screen, and there are those that whisper from behind heavy velvet curtains. Esmanur's story is exactly that. Not loud, almost ghostly, but no less important for it. If Magnificent Century is a grand symphony of power, love, and betrayal, then this girl's fate is its quiet, heart-wrenching minor note, which resonates long after the final credits. She was not a sultana. She did not become a favorite, the mother of an heir or an architect of palace intrigues. Esmanur, also known as Kader, fate, an irony every screenwriter would appreciate, was the daughter of two giants, two tragic figures of the era, the all-powerful Grand Vizier Ibrahim Pasha and his beloved, the unfortunate Nigar Kalfa. Her life, from its first breath, became not a gift, but a weapon, a secret, a bargaining chip in the hands of those who shaped the empire's destiny. This video is not just an attempt to retell a plotline, but to trace Esmanur's ghostly path to the end. Who could a girl born of such blood and raised in such secrecy have become? Did she vanish forever in simple provincial clothes, or did her genes, her lineage, make themselves known? Perhaps her real fate, left off screen, is more dramatic than any script. We are embarking on an investigation, not through the dusty annals of history, where, alas, there is not a single line about her, but through the laws of drama, psychology, and the context of the era. Ready to hear the story that Magnificent Century only hinted at? Then let's begin. The most interesting part is always what's left off screen. The silence in the chambers of Topkapi was special, thick, viscous, like honey poisoned with fear. And in this silence, under the cover of night in 1534, the impossible happened. Far from the eyes of the concubines, far from the ears of the eunuchs, in the tiny room of the servant Nigar Kalfa, a baby girl was born. Not a cry, but a quiet sigh tore through the night. And so, in secret, began the life of someone who was never meant to be. This was not merely a secret. It was a crime against the harem's order, against the very structure of imperial power. The mother, Nigar, a devoted servant of Hürrem Sultan, a woman with intelligent eyes and a steel will hidden beneath an obedient facade. The father, Ibrahim Pasha, the Grand Vizier, a man whose power stretched from the Sultan's chambers to the borders of Hungary. A slave who became a ruler, Suleiman's childhood friend, bearing the title Serdar, commander of the armies. Between them lay a chasm of status, an ocean of conventions, and a passion that swam across that ocean. When Ibrahim, risking everything, first held the bundle containing his daughter, he named her Esmanur, beautiful light, a name prayer, a name hope. It held within it all the poetry of the Ottoman court, all the dream of divine grace. But within the walls of Topkapi, even poetry became a weapon. This name was a shield, an incantation against an evil fate, an attempt to sanctify a birth considered sinful by the court. Ibrahim was at his zenith then. His Hungarian campaigns thundered across Europe. He ruled from a throne nearly equal to the Sultan's. His arrogance grew, right up to the fateful inscription, Sultan by the grace of God, on his seal. And in this atmosphere of impunity, the birth of Esmanur seemed to him not a danger, but another trophy, proof of his might which transcended even palace etiquette. He visited his daughter in secret, bringing exotic toys, a silk doll from Damascus, a silver rattle in the shape of a crescent moon. Each gift was a tangible embodiment of his illusion. He, Ibrahim, could do anything. This origin story is pure fiction by the screenwriters. The historical Ibrahim Pasha was married to Muhsine Khatun, and they had children. But the genius of the Magnificent Century lies in taking dry chronicles and breathing human tragedy into them. Esmanur became the quintessence of all the unnamed, all the children of the empire erased by history. She is the ghost of an alternate reality where passion is more important than protocol. Through her fate, the series speaks of a fundamental truth. In the Ottoman Empire, even love was a political act. Even the birth of a child became a diplomatic crisis. Blood mixed outside permitted boundaries was a threat to the entire system. From her first breath, Esmanur was not just a daughter, she was a symbol of the all-powerful vizier's weakness, his Achilles' heel, his living, trembling mistake. And like any mistake in the Topkapi Palace, she had to be corrected, sooner or later. The early years of her existence were a history of shadows. While the children of the sultanas grew up bathed in attention, guarded by eunuchs and tutors, Esmanur came to know the world through a slit in a carved screen. Her universe was confined to a few rooms, the smell of old carpets, and the quiet voices of women who taught her not to draw attention. Her toy was not a bejeweled rocking horse, but a simple wooden figurine that Ibrahim Pasha, her father, would bring in secret. The Grand Vizier of the empire, whose word decided the fates of provinces, here in the half-light became simply a father. Nigar would steal towards her like a thief, creeping along familiar corridors. Their rendezvous smelled of milk and fear. Every minute between mother and daughter was stolen from Sultana Hurrem, from duty, from the vigilant eyes of Hatis Sultan. The tales her mother whispered were of a father hero who, somewhere out there beyond the walls, ruled the world. It was a strange, perverse upbringing. The girl was raised on the legend of a man she barely knew and taught to fear the world in which she was destined to live. The Topkapi harem of the 16th century was a complex school of survival, where the final exam could cost one's life. From the age of 3, Esmanur began a curriculum devised not by Mudaddis teachers, but by old Kalfa stewards. Her textbooks were not treatises on philosophy, but the knots on embroidery, the intonations in a voice, and the whispers behind one's back. The Quran, etiquette, dancing, this was the compulsory program, but the true disciplines were the electives, reading faces, the language of the eunuch's gestures, the art of silence. While the Shehzade princes studied the geography of conquests, Esmanur studied the map of power within the harem, whose smile was false, whose gaze held a threat, whose favor was worth seeking. Her mother, Nigâr, was her chief professor in this dark academy. "Here the snakes wear silk," she would say, tying her daughter's sash. Lessons in caution were woven into lessons in embroidery. By the age of 5, Esmanur already understood her place in this ecosystem. She was a bastard, an unofficial asset, whose value depended entirely on the fluctuations of her father's mood and the fury of his lawful wife. But shadow, as it turned out, was unreliable armor. Esmanur's childhood was steeped not in mother's milk, but in an atmosphere of chronic threat. She learned to walk without a sound and breathe quietly. Her childhood playthings were not balls, but accidentally overheard fragments of conversation, gossip about Hurrem, whispers of executions, the muffled sobs of concubines. She became the perfect observer, a little ghost of Topkapi. This nurtured in her an intuition as sharp as a blade. Her world was black and white, no feasts, no celebrations in her honor, only contrast, the warmth of secret meetings with her parents and the bone-chilling cold of constant danger. "Strength here is not in yataghans," Nigâr would instill, wiping away the tears she herself forbade from showing. "It is in the right word, and in a tear shed at the right moment." Esmanur learned to cry silently. This was her first serious skill. And then the world, already unsteady, began to crumble. Rumors like a poisonous mist seeped even into her hiding place, whispers that the Pasha has lost favor. The idealized image of her father, the Titan, cracked. Nigâr, her face now a mask of horror, began teaching new, urgent subjects, the basics of conspiracy, the ABCs of escape, prayers of desperation. Esmanur's childhood ended the night Ibrahim was arrested. Although in real chronology she would have been about 2 years old, the fictional harem childhood in the series heightens the drama, showing how the system suppresses individuality. The last thing she remembered from that life, perhaps her mother's frantic embrace, her whisper full of love and despair, and the hands of another woman leading her into an even deeper darkness. The harem did not raise a princess in her. It forged a survivor. It took a child of forbidden love and, as in an alchemical crucible, recast her timidity into hidden steel, her naivety into hypervigilance, her need for love into a weapon for future manipulations. She carried into adulthood not memories of sunny games, but a map of all the secret passages of Topkapi and a quiet, unchildlike voice in her head repeating, "Trust no one." Her childhood was a long lesson in how even the strongest love within these palace walls is cast into the links of a heavy chain. In the series, Nigâr, exiled and alone, finds meaning for her existence in Esmanur. The girl becomes her obsession, her only chance to reclaim what was taken from her, family. And she decides on a desperate step, flight, an escape to their homeland with her daughter in her arms. This ship was meant to be their salvation, but it became the stage for the final act of their relationship. Imagine this scene: the creak of wooden decks, the cries of seagulls, the wind smelling of freedom, and suddenly he appears, Ibrahim, not as a father, but as a fearsome, relentless force of the state. His wrath is not merely the shout of a jealous parent, it is the cold fury of a man whose property, his most vulnerable point, has been attempted stolen. He tears Esmanur from Nigâr's arms. This gesture, a physical and symbolic rupture. His verdict lands like the blow of a dagger. Never even look in her direction again. He is not just taking a child from Nigâr, he is stripping her of the right to maternal longing. From that moment, Nigâr can only steal furtive glances from afar, greedily catching rumors about the one whose face she is already beginning to forget. And then came the night that broke the empire's spine. A silken cord, the Sultan's silent command. Grand Vizier Ibrahim Pasha was strangled. His world, a world of power, intrigue, and a secret daughter, collapsed overnight. What happens to a child when the mountain that protected her falls? Esmanur becomes a living, breathing secret, a dangerous memory. Matrakchi, Ibrahim's loyal comrade, acts swiftly and wisely. He does not hide her in Istanbul, where every wall has ears and the eyes of the Haseki Sultan see everything. He sends the girl far away, to relatives of the executed Pasha, not into luxury, but into obscurity, not for greatness, but for safety. This is not exile, but evacuation. She is erased from the palace chronicles as thoroughly as the name of a disgraced official is scrubbed from state documents. Years pass. Nigâr, hardened by the fire of betrayal and possessing a chilling strength, begins her investigation. She searches for traces of Esmanur with the same tenacity with which Mihrama Sultan seeks political influence, but it is futile. Esmanur has dissolved. She has become a ghost, a legend whispered in palace kitchens and back corridors. Perhaps she grew up under a different name in a distant province, married a simple man, raised her own children, listening with a smile to tales of the Great Vizier Ibrahim, unaware she is hearing the story of her father. Her fate is the bitterest and most perfect ending for a drama about power, not a loud death on the scaffold, but a quiet, total vanishing. In a world where every step is recorded, every intrigue documented, Esmanur becomes a blank page. Her story is cut off mid-sentence, leaving the viewer not with an answer, but with a heavy, aching question. What ultimately carries more weight, the bright but short life of a father who stirred history, or the long, invisible life of a daughter whom history did not deign to even record? Esmanur remains an eternal enigma, a girl who was loved, used, saved, and lost. A heavenly light that was extinguished for the palace, but perhaps still glowed quietly somewhere far away in a very ordinary, real life. The narrative flow in Magnificent Century sometimes resembles Istanbul traffic. It either stands still or hurtles forward madly, ignoring all laws of physics and logic. Esmanur's story is a prime example of such a traffic collapse. Born around 1534, by the time of Ibrahim Pasha's execution in 1536, she is still an infant. But then the writer's turbo mode kicks in. Within a few episodes, we see not just a conscious girl, but one who observes her own exile with cold, adult understanding. Where did the years go? They were simply cut out, like an extra piece of baklava. It turns out the girl had, at best, 4 years for everything, for growing up, realizing her status as a bastard, and forming that heart-wrenching longing for her father. The historical foundation also develops cracks here. Ibrahim Pasha was executed on the night of March 15, 1536, a fact harder than granite. But the series carefully sidesteps another cornerstone, his legal widow, Hatice Sultan. Suleiman's sister, a woman of colossal influence and wealth who outlived her husband by many years and managed his vast estate. This raises a question that trips up the entire construct. Where was Hatice while the potential shameful daughter of her husband by a servant girl was growing up? Why would this proud and powerful sultana, whose status was tarnished by Ibrahim's very liaison with Nigar, allow the girl to live, let alone grow up within the harem walls? Real harem politics did not tolerate such threats. The bastard daughter of a favorite was not a tragic heroine, she was a target. The writers sacrificed this logic for the sake of dramatic tension, turning Hatice from a real historical figure into a shadow. From a historical standpoint, Esmanur's storyline is pure fiction, which is fine for drama. Parga in the mid-16th century was an Ottoman hinterland, not a classic place for exiling noble children. For that, other locations existed, remote sanjaks of Anatolia, or say Crimea. The real children of Ibrahim and Hatice, historians speak of sons, were not erased into dust after his execution. Their status was partially preserved thanks to their mother. Bastards, in the Ottoman tradition, were more often either quietly eliminated or sent along completely different social elevators, for instance to the Janissaries. The romantic image of a girl gazing longingly at the sea with a toy in her hands is beautiful, but the reality of harem upbringing for such children was far more prosaic and harsh. All of these are not mistakes, but conscious sacrifices. The writers, led by Meryem Ceylan and Murad Dizdar, took history as a canvas, not an instruction manual. Gaps in chronology, abolished bureaucracy, forgotten characters – this is the price the viewer pays for the breakneck pace and focus on the core drama, the story of Suleiman and Hurrem. Esmanur in this scheme is a plot device. Her rapid maturation is needed to evoke our pity more quickly. Her disappearance is necessary to avoid overloading the plot. She is a heart-wrenching but logically fragile element of a magnificent yet very liberal Ottoman fairy tale. The show's popularity proves it. People watch not for calendars and decrees, but for emotions. And here, the creators hit the bullseye every time. Now, let's see how Esmanur's fate might have unfolded in real life had she actually existed. The 16th century in Istanbul was an era where shadows grew longer than their owners, and the death of one of the empire's most powerful men, the Grand Vizier Ibrahim Pasha, cast the longest one of all. March 15th, 1536, did not merely mark the end of the Sultan's favorite's life. In that moment, the countdown began for everything that bore his name, his blood, his lineage, his legacy. It is within this total shadow that the 2-year-old Esmanur would have existed, a girl born not to a lawful wife, the Padishah's sister, Hatice Sultan, but to a Kalfa, servant woman, Nigar. In the eyes of the imperial bureaucracy, scratching away with pens in their ledgers, defters, she simply did not exist. She was a statistical error, a stain to be erased. The first act of the drama would have played out swiftly and without an audience. The execution of her father triggered the mechanism of musadere, total confiscation. Those entering the chambers where Kalfa Nigar lived with her daughter came not with questions, but with a rope and a sack. Adultery with a high-ranking official, especially one that resulted in offspring, was not a private affair, but a threat to the established order. A Sharia court in such cases did not stand on ceremony. The most likely, the quietest outcome for Nigar was a silken cord or a cup of opium infusion. Her disappearance from the harem records would not have prompted a single note in the margins. And the girl? A child, especially a female, posed no direct dynastic threat. The killing of infants, though practiced, was not always the optimal solution. It left a trace. It stained one's karma. The empire offered more refined tools of oblivion. Esmanur would not have been killed. She would have been erased. Most likely at night, wrapped in a simple rug, she would have been carried out through the black gates of Topkapi and handed into the custody of some mute servant of a loyal Beylerbey. Her future lay not in Europe, not in Parga. That enclave was too important a trading hub for exile. Her path led east, to some remote Anatolian province like Manavgat or Tokat, a place where dust chokes the mouth and memory.
There, her new name would have become something like Fatma or Zeynep. She would have been placed in the household of a minor Timariyat, landowner, or a retired janissary with the condition, raise her as your own, but with no right of inheritance, and marry her off at the first opportunity. Her roots were to dissolve like a clump of earth in a raging torrent. Her education, only the Quran, housekeeping, and obedience. No languages, no music, no hint that blood once close to the throne had ever flowed in her veins. By the age of 12, she would have been married, not to a brilliant pasha, but to an equally provincial sipahi or a qadi's clerk. Her dowry, modest and anonymous, would have been paid by the treasury from her own father's confiscated funds, the iron Ottoman irony. Her life from that moment on is a cycle: pregnancies, childbirths, surviving the plague season or a failed harvest. Perhaps by 30 she is already a widow, a mother of 3 or 4 surviving children eking out an existence in her eldest son's house. In the evenings, gazing at the hearth smoke, she would sometimes catch fragments of strange foreign memories, the scent of the sea, the sound of an unfamiliar lullaby, the image of a woman in a plum-colored dress, but she would immediately shoo them away. Such thoughts are dangerous. They lead to poison in the drink or an accident at the well. And what of the capital at this time? Ibrahim Pasha's sons by Hatice, Mehmed and Ahmed, though under a cloud of suspicion, continued their careers within the system. Their blood and connections saved him from utter oblivion. But their half-sister, to them she is a ghost, a disgrace best left unexhumed. Hatice Sultana herself, had she learned of her existence, would have seen in her only living proof of her husband's betrayal, and she would have demanded a final resolution. The climax of her hypothetical life comes not in palace intrigues, but in her complete severance from them. When Suleiman the Magnificent dies in 1566, she is 32. She is somewhere in Anatolia, nursing another child and listening as the mullah preaches a sermon on the death of the Lord of the Age. Her father's name, if uttered at all, is whispered and qualified. Her own story died many years prior, on the very day the Janissaries entered Ibrahim Pasha's chambers.
The end? It is banal and therefore real. She dies sometime between 1580 and 1590 of fever or childbed sickness. She is buried in a simple village cemetery under an unremarkable stone. None of her children know who their mother truly was. The archive of her life is a few lines in a Qadi's court register. Fatma, daughter of Abdullah, wife of so-and-so, mother of such-and-such. Her true name, Esmanur, dissolved into the Anatolian wind on the day the 2-year-old girl was taken from Istanbul. Thus did the system grind personal tragedies into the dust of statistics. Not a dagger in the dark, but an administrative decree. Not poison in the halva, but a marriage to a stranger in a God-forsaken village. Her fate is not a story of a fall from great heights. It is an account of being erased from the map before you could even understand where your city was. But the devotees of the magnificent century are not merely viewers, they are archaeologists, reconstructing the skeleton of one destiny from the fragments of others' scenes. They have turned a lacuna into a legend. Why? Because Esmanur is pure, undiluted pain. Ibrahim was executed for his actions. Nigar died from her choices. The sultanas fought for power. But a child is absolute innocence, trampled by the grand game of adults. This is her superpower. Everyone who has ever felt abandoned by the system, by parents, by work, by the state, has found in her a focal point for their own melancholy. The legacy proved so enduring that it demanded continuation. Fans wrote petitions demanding a sequel, citing the figure of 5 million signatures as their argument. In new projects like Kosum, they searched for the slightest hints that some heroine might be a descendant of that very girl from Parga. The screenwriters gifted the audience a tragedy, and they, in turn, gifted the heroine an infinity of alternative universes. Esmanur ceased to be merely a character. She became an empty chair in the courtroom of Ottoman history, upon which every viewer could mentally seat themselves. And as long as this hope lives, the ship to Parga will never reach the shore. It will forever sail in the fog between the frame and the imagination, laden not with a single child's sorrow, but with the collective longing of millions.